Serious, defense attorneys of Reddit, what is the worst offense you've ever had to defend? I'm a law clerk at a criminal defense firm. We take cases on appeal after the client has already pled guilty or been found guilty at trial. One of our clients is a convicted serial child assaulter, but some of the offenses occurred when he was a juvenile himself, under 17 in my state, which the law treats differently. I was tasked with going through the paperwork we received and figuring out which victims he assaulted when he was an adult, and which victims he assaulted when he was a juvenile, to calculate his correct punishment range. Problem is, the official court documents all name the victims with pseudonyms, John Doe, etc., while the police reports use their actual names. There is no legend or index in the file to tell me which victim is which, and it's cheaper for my bosses to pay me to figure it out than to force the government to turn over a list. So I had to match the child victims to their code names based on their biographical details and their accounts of the abuse. Boss, child A is black, around age 9, and was touched around the genitals and anus with the defendant's fingers. Timmy Smith is black, and matches child A's time frame, but his report only mentions the defendant's tongue on his anus, not the fingers. There are no other black victims. I believe there is a 90% chance that child A is Timmy Smith, and so on. I am so glad that I will be moving into prosecution in a month or so. Defended an old guy driver who hit and killed a mentally challenged girl who had run across 6 lanes of traffic against the signal. The guy did nothing wrong. The worst part about the situation was that we were being paid by the dead girl's family's insurance company, who the family was suing for benefits. So in my state, if you are in a relationship with someone or have been and you commit certain crimes, they get tagged as domestic violence. This tag gives additional penalties. Long story short, my client received a BJ from a girl and then hit her. We went to trial because the state wanted to say that one BJ was a relationship and my guy didn't want to do the domestic violence classes. So we took it to the jury, who ruled that one BJ isn't a relationship. I always have wondered how many BJs is a relationship. Posted elsewhere, but I defended a guy who sent poop through the mail to his ex-GF from state prison. I don't know how it got past prison officials, but it did, and he didn't deny sending it. However, we went to trial because he wanted me to argue that the poop was expressive speech, and thus protected by the First Amendment. We lost. Although the offense itself wasn't particularly repugnant, I once had to defend someone who had been charged for driving with a suspended license because he was, quite honestly, it isn't my opinion, on his way to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to prevent himself from drinking. He was a very serious alcoholic who had been convicted of impaired driving several times, and he had found that the only way he could stay sober was by attending AA meetings regularly. On this particular day, his license was suspended because of a prior conviction. He lived quite a distance outside of town, and his friend who typically drove him into town cancelled at the last minute. In a panic, worried that without attending the meeting he would relapse, and inevitably end up hurting someone else, quite possibly by driving impaired again, he drove his own vehicle, stone cold sober, into town. On the way, he was stopped by the police and charged with driving with a suspended license. In court, I wasn't sure whether to tell the judge that despite a delay on the roadside and the laying of a very serious additional criminal charge to this poor guy's history, he managed to call his AA sponsor, who picked him up on the side of the highway and drove him to the meeting just in time to arrive only a few minutes late, and stay sober for an additional 24 hours, albeit with a reduced likelihood of the same positive outcome on the sobriety front the following day. Prior public defender, I once defended a very nice 80-ish-year-old man who had been married like 50 years, several kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. He'd been charged with intimate acts with a horse. Turns out most of the community knew he'd been intimately interacting with livestock for many years and they'd usually look the other way, but I guess he went too far with the horse. He pled guilty to the felony but of course got no jail time. Worst had to be the gentleman who spent years having non-consensual intercourse with his stepdaughter. He videotaped it, so we had to watch a trial. We knew the reason he insisted on going to trial because he wanted to see video again. Public defender here. I once represented an 11-year-old charged with forcible sodomy against another 11-year-old. You will often see kids charged with assaulting other kids, but it's rare to get a juvenile defendant that young. Sometimes the parents are overreacting to two kids playing doctor. Sometimes it's evidence that the kids themselves have been assaulted by an adult. Juvenile cases get complicated. Juvenile assault cases get absurdly complicated. Between draconian laws that aren't really designed for juveniles, competency issues, how do you get a knowing, intelligent, and voluntary plea from a child, and moronic parents, it can get pretty overwhelming. Immigration law often intersects with criminal defense law, since having criminal convictions will get you banned from or kicked out of many countries. In my first year of practicing, I had to argue for a man convicted of assaulting his young daughters to be allowed into my country, in order to help care for his disabled young step-granddaughter. Reading the details of what he did to his daughters, who were around the ages of 6-8, was horrifying. The now adult daughters wrote letters saying they'd forgiven him and had no problems trusting him around their own children. I just couldn't stop thinking that this guy was possibly going to be left alone with a little girl who couldn't move or talk, let alone defend herself from a convicted child abuser. Not that children should be expected to be able to defend themselves from a grown man. Co-worker represented a guy that beat and burned a kitten and recorded it. She had to watch the video and she came to my office crying after. Frick that guy. Not worst in so much as it was serious, but worst as in, geez, do I really have to do this? One time I was trying to defend a guy that was alleged to have thrown his own pee in a woman's face. The kicker? The guy was an inmate and the woman was a guard at the prison. So it really takes things up a notch penalty wise. Our defense? Her face tested positive for urea, a substance that is in human pee, but is also in an enormous variety of female beauty products. We had to basically argue that she put the pee on her own face through one of these products and they couldn't prove the defendant didn't just throw water on her. Criminal defense attorney here. I hate doing child pee cases. Not only is the crime reprehensible, but then I have to go and review the discovery myself, which I absolutely hate. Thankfully haven't had one of those cases in a while. I will not say what he got, as it may lead to a way to find the case. But long story short, guy was accused of assaulting his granddaughter and she was pregnant from it. I, along with the state, became confused on the DNA of the grandchild's child. We learned that his grandchild was the product of assault on his own daughter. So he was the grandfather father of the complainant and the great grandfather father of the complainant's child. I'm not a defense attorney, but I worked a brief stint at the public defender's office during law school. If you spend any time working for the PD, you will quickly learn the names of the repeat offenders who come in on a monthly, if not weekly, basis. One such fellow, let's call him Stan, liked to do drugs. I was informed by the DA's office that he had a warrant out for a probation violation, so I gave Stan a call and told him to turn himself in. Now, as I said, Stan was a regular and knew all of the drills. If you turn yourself in, or get picked up, after a certain time, you wear your street clothes in front of the judge instead of the little jumpsuit. As it turns out, he turned himself in with a crack pipe in his pocket. This can't get any worse, right? Wrong? I'm thinking that Stan has to be the dumbest man to face that courtroom when I look up and see him being escorted into the courtroom by the bailiff wearing a shirt that says, "High as frick." Let's just say his bail hearing was about as successful as the rest of his life choices. Worst I had was when my client was charged with impersonating a police officer. It was the worst because it was so ridiculous. He was 70 years old and was going to the social security office. When he went through the metal detector, he had a police shield that he put in the tray with his keys and phone. He collected police memorabilia and liked to carry it around. The guard at the metal detector arrested him. I had to defend a guy who was caught in a public park after dark jerking off with used dirty baby diapers. The police rolled up on him doing it and shined their spotlight on him and he looked at them and said, "I have problems." Also defended a guy that walked up to a rival gang member and shot him in the face. Then he and his buddies fled and got involved in a high-speed chase and he was shooting out the window at the chasing cops. I had to interview him alone at the downtown Modesto County Jail, which is a total crap hole. It was the first murderer I defended and I was scared. He turned out to be very polite. My client assaulted his daughters over a period of years. It went to a full jury trial. Cross-examining the children was very unpleasant. My client was convicted. The evidence was overwhelming. I made it clear before trial that he was going down, but the defendant would not take a plea. The judge, in an unrecorded discussion held while the jury was out, told the prosecutor and me to do our utmost to make certain there were no appealable issues since the defendant was a monster. I hated every minute of that trial, but I did my utmost to represent my client. Worked on a case in which the defendant was accused of decapitating his grandma with a bread knife. Gruesome and scary. Well, violent assaults, and I don't just mean that the act was accomplished by force, I mean the victim was beaten, sodomized with a broomstick, etc., are never easy. Particularly because assaulters tend to be extreme narcissists who are very angry at women because reasons the narcissism makes defending them a real chore, because they tend to be delusional. For example, the victim will never testify. Less creepily, I had a fellow who was dealing crack in a local bar when the cops did a closing check and recognized him as someone whose parole conditions prohibited him from being in bars. He brightly fled to the men's room, dead end, to flush his dope, but they were right on his heels, so they had him. This frustrated him so badly that he pooped his pants and tried to fling the resulting product at the officers. He was never really clear on why I didn't think this was a triable case. I had a client who was a narco in Colombia, extradited to the US. Killed more people than he could count. Actually lost track. A guy who made videotapes of himself having intercourse with his 6-year-old daughter. A guy who killed another person in a road rage incident and shot his dog. Stuffed bullets across the windshield to scare the guy's wife, then went home and went to bed. I could go on for days. The gang murderers are pretty routine at this point. As a young lady, it's the ones who aren't killing in the name of territory, street cred, etc. that get to me. I was really affected by a particularly brutal, cold, calculated, sick 30-something man accused of murder. He was eerily calm and cocky about his encounter with an underage girl he met and chatted up for about 20 minutes that resulted ultimately in her drowning with suspicious surrounding circumstances. He was obviously disturbed and it was very unsettling just being near him. Images of him smiling for the news cameras in the courtroom will weirdly pop into my head on a somewhat random basis, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies. The act he put on when he insisted upon being put on the stand in trial ruined him. He would have walked but for his ridiculous testimony. Within seconds the jury, who had been paying close attention previously, looked horrified as he told these stories and stopped taking notes. Their minds were made up as soon as he opened his creepy mouth. He was quickly convicted. We did a really stellar job in his case, but he dug his own grave. Justice was served. The summer after my first year in law school, I worked in the public defender's office. Numerous attorneys had to defend clients who had allegedly intimately assaulted infants and toddlers. I guess in order to cope with doing that, a lot of them made jokes out of it. I would hear somebody talking about a case and an attorney would say something like, "Yeah, but did you see how that baby was dressed? She was asking for it." I never knew how to feel about that. Horrible and distasteful, but they have to stand in court and represent those people. They can't get out of the case. I don't know, man. Gallows humor, common in all jobs where people have to deal with horrible things. I hated representing child assaulters. If the allegation came from a wife during divorce proceedings, then I always thought that I had a chance because it was common to allege that in order to deny visitation. Tell the policeman judge that daddy touched you. I always felt bad for the 19-year-old with the 15-year-old when it was consensual, but the 15-year-old girl doesn't have the legal authority to consent, so the teenager boy would be rung up for ag assault of a child. The stepfather stepdaughter. If I had one of those cases, the guy was guilty 99 out of 100 times. The thing that made me sick would be the "you don't understand, she wanted me" line. Really, she's 11 and you're 39. The worst, the biological father feeling up his daughter. He'd wait by the bathroom door as she would finish her shower and pull her towel off and feel her up, saying, "I'm your father, I have a right to see how you're developing." This went on for years until she finally got sick of it and told a teacher, who told the cops. She was 14 when she'd finally got up the guts to turn in her own dad. He ran off before the case was resolved, but he was caught many years later, when his daughter was a full-grown adult, and she didn't want to revisit those days, so some lesser charge was worked out by some different attorney. I quit accepting those cases 15 years ago. Domestic abuse from a serial abuser. He had been charged multiple times with the same victim. She would repeatedly forgive him and not show up for the proceedings, and the cases would get dismissed. Probably represented 4-5 times and got every case dismissed. Just a horrible human being. Defending parents who no longer want their children. Defending children who still want to be with their parents. Not easy. I had to defend an individual who was part of a massive infant assaulting group. This group would video chat via Skype about their plans and how much they love to frick kids. So anyway, I had to take instructions and be professional whilst my client told me all the horrific details of what he did, how, why, when etc. I have dealt with all sorts of outrageous and horrible offenses, yet this one always sticks out for me. Years ago there was a silent alarm that went off at the petting part of the zoo at about 3 AM. Usually nothing, so the cops don't show up, lights flashing and guns blazing. So they're walking around taking a look and find a guy on a stool just going at it with a cow. Now this is one of the most unfortunate looking human beings you can imagine. Dude is hideous, and honestly you kinda feel sorry for him and understand that the petting zoo is a logical place, in his mind, to find intimate partners. Cops arrest him and put him in holding. Because of the timing of it all, it was just before shift change. So every cop working in the precinct has to come by and laugh at the cow puffer. Then they tell the story to all the guys coming on shift, so they all go by and do the same thing. We got an initial hearing that morning, big city, and when I tell the judge that story, he throws out the case and tells the guy he's been punished enough by the embarrassment. I defended a guy in preliminary hearing who was accused of assaulting his daughter. It was awful because she was very graphic. I did my best to limit the scope of her answers for the sake of my own sanity. A multi-billion-dollar company who defrauded a very small local corporation. A guy who beat his 16-year-old daughter with a board and insisted on invoking his Christian values as a defense. Not the worst crime ever by any measure, but seriously frick off, dude. A friend of the family is a lawyer who has a favorite story he likes to tell. Basically, he had to defend someone who just randomly punched a stranger, a 90-year-old grandmother, in the face one day, in front of a dozen witnesses, evidently just because he was in a bad mood. The only defense he could come up to give before the judge was, "Your Honor, he only hit her once." Paralegal here. Criminal defense. My first case was helping defend a father who assaulted his daughter since age 8 and promised her a puppy if she would let him stick it all the way in after she turned 12. During an assembly in school entitled "Is Someone Hurting You? Tell Someone," she started crying and ran out of the assembly and finally told someone. She brought that 4-year-old dog with her to court as her support animal while giving her testimony because the father denied it until the end, despite the victim identifying the specific P sites the father made her watch on his computer and both their mixed DNA all over all of the furniture, in the bathroom, cushions, etc. They also had his computer from the pawn shop he hooked it at, and attempted to reinstall Windows, not knowing that the files are still there. The father worked in the depth of corrections and told the daughter that daddy would get killed if she ever told anyone. He was found guilty and got 45 years. I quit as a paralegal after 6 months on the job. It started taking my soul. You have been visited by the grandmother gymnast. Comment: "My body is my temple, so you can do that when you're old." Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.